Hi, he's Professor Eric Bronson.
And he's Professor Beck Strah. And you're listening to Breakdown Prison.
2, 3, break!
Hate to spoil his fun, but we're gonna bust out of here.
2, 3, break!
I'm locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
2, 3, break!
I can honestly say I'm a changed man. No danger to society here. God's honest truth.
2, 3, break!
I'm not leaving this cell. I'll get out my way. The right way.
2, 3, break!
AHOY dudes, welcome back to another episode of Prison Breakdown. I'm Professor Beck Strah, former corrections officer, researcher of prisons, and former prison instructor. Joining me is Professor Eric Bronson. Hi, Eric Bronson.
Good morning, my friend. And let me tell you, I am ready to let the good times roll. I am so pumped for next week. It's a trip of a lifetime, folks.
Tell us what this trip is, Eric. What is the trip?
Heading to Louisiana and specifically New Orleans, and then to the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. Man, it just doesn't get any better than that when it comes to prison visitation.
I'm glad you qualified the trip at the end, because it does get better than that. But when it comes to prison visitation, no better.
Not when it comes to going to see a prison. And more importantly than that, the absolute pinnacle of prison recreation and the Prison Rodeo at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. There is nothing like the Angola Prison Rodeo. It is pure spectacle, and we are heading there.
I hear it is the wildest show in the whole South.
I think it's bigger than the South. I think once you see it, you're going to understand. They should call it the wildest show in the world. There's nothing else like it. Again, there will be people cheering for some of the wrong reasons. You know, some when they get to see inmates getting thrown around by bulls, which I don't agree with that. And you're going to feel there's some exploitation, but it is the craziest thing you have ever seen. Until you've experienced it, it's so crazy it'll make Bourbon Street look tame.
I got to tell you, producer Britt and I, we went to see acro cats once in Seattle, which is people who trained cats to do tricks. And some of the cats would just walk through the audience. Cats are not well trained, but that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, no, I get nothing. No, wait, just wait. This is just so mind boggling. And you know, there's a fair going on. There's carnival rides. There's inmates selling hamburgers with Krispy Kreme donuts for buns. I mean, just come on.
Let me ask you both, and this is outside of the rodeo that you've been to here. What's the craziest form of live entertainment you've seen?
Oh boy, I don't know. That's a tough one.
Live piercing is a pretty brutal one.
You're just watching people get pierced, or is this when the people get pierced and like they get the back piercing and then they hook it into that?
Yeah,
suspension.
Yep, both definitely. But yeah, I've seen some.
Did you have
piercings.
To pay an admission fee to see this?
Yeah, it was like at a local like goth and fetish night kind of thing. No.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I have not seen that.
Yeah. I'm trying. I don't know. My old mind can come up with anything. Too many concussions.
It's like needle play. So they put like a big row of needles along someone and just like basically like pierce like their entire arm and then just take the needles out.
That's pretty crazy.
You don't set the other ends on, put a little flame on the other end of it?
No, I don't think that's safe.
I thought it was about entertainment. Fuck safety, right? Come on.
True.
That's not what we're talking about here, Britt.
True. We are talking about a prison rodeo. So
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem with it is these participants never get the opportunity to practice. They are just thrown, I'd say, to the lions, because that's kind of what it thrown to the wolves, thrown to the bulls. They're thrown to the bulls and they try and hang on to the horses, and
it's going to be a lot of animals there.
There absolutely are, and our students will be some of those.
Indeed. I think it's time to thank our lovely sponsor, don't you?
Absolutely. We need to thank the School of Justice Studies at Roger Williams University, offering degrees in cybersecurity, legal studies, forensic science, criminal justice, and graduate degrees in criminal justice, cybersecurity, public administration, and leadership. We've got everything you need when it comes to your understanding of the justice system right here at Roger Williams on the Bay, right here on this beautiful campus in Bristol, Rhode Island.
Bingo. We're that one-stop shop for all your justice needs in education. Look us up. Give us a look. We want to help you.
And who knows, maybe you could be one of those students heading to Angola one of these days to watch a prison rodeo.
Come join us. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great time.
So, as Eric has been alluding to, we are taking a group of students on a trip down to New Orleans. We'll be attending the prison rodeo. We'll be seeing Angola, and we will be experiencing firsthand some of the craziness that Louisiana State Penitentiary has to offer that we will be talking about further today. But first, I must insist that we go down the razor wire and figure out what is happening in the news.
Fresh news, hot off the razor wire.
All right. Not a very chipper topic today, but I thought it was important to point out that the United States has very quietly gone a little bonkers when it comes to executions this year. We recently had our 19th execution of the year, and we still have 2 months to go. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is there were a few big cases in terms of these executions. The one in right there at the end of September on the 26th, Alan Eugene Miller in Alabama was executed. He was the second person executed in Alabama by nitrogen hypoxia. And the reason why that's important is they're bringing back the gas chamber. And so this is inert gas asphyxiation, as a form of asphyxiation which results from breathing a physiologically inert gas in the absence of oxygen or a low amount of oxygen rather than the atmospheric air. So this is the Alabama and other states that do employ the death penalty movement away from lethal injection due to the absence of the triple cocktail drugs that we used to get from Italy. They become impossible to obtain because Italy is the only country who supplies them, and as a result of Italy being part of the European Union, they will no longer supply the United States with these drugs. So Alabama in January and in September executed an individual using gas in the gas chamber. Now, they did originally try to execute Alan Eugene Miller a few months ago using lethal injection, but they were unable to find a vein. So instead, they used the gas chamber. The other case that is fairly recent was just a couple days before that in Missouri. Marcellus E. Williams, who there's a lot of attention on this case because there appears to be evidence that he was innocent of his crimes, and he maintained his innocence all the way up until the execution, which, just for those of you who aren't into looking into, studying the death penalty or people on death row, 98% of people on death row before execution admit to their crimes. And so that 2% who hold on, there's something to that they don't apologize or admit to their crime or their fault, whatever it might be. Marcellus Williams was one of those who maintained his innocence. And so both the Missouri State Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court denied appeals to extend his life, and he was executed by a lethal injection in Missouri on the 24th. And then we just had another execution this week on the 1st, and in Texas. Texas will not be outdone. So they said some of these other states are starting to get some attention. We need to execute somebody else. So Garcia Glenn White, a serial killer in the Houston area. He was executed for killing a mom and her twin daughters. And they used lethal injection as well. But I just wanted to use this as use this as our news bit, just because, again, we're up to 19 this year and we still have 2 months to go. And we're on we have a few states that are really driving the death penalty numbers up. So obviously Missouri and Texas, as you've heard, Alabama is one of them. Those are our big culprits, and Georgia, Oklahoma are others. And Florida has executed an individual as well. So
now, there's this evidence of his innocence. Why would they not investigate this further?
Well, I think it's important to understand that it was Missouri. It was a little bit of a high-profile case, and I don't know at this point, when they go through these mandatory appeals and nothing is done during the mandatory appeals. When they get to the optional appeals or appeals to the Supreme Court right before execution, that when you have conservative courts, they're not looking to be very sympathetic to individuals at that time period. They're sending messages, as they say, to possible felons, and it's we understand that that these judges are politicians as well, and they want to make sure they stay in power and don't get removed somehow or get voted out or anything like that, or receive any pressure to be removed from office. And I think the U.S. Supreme Court is one of those where they right now they are so far to the right that they want to make sure they're seen as being ultra right, and if they would have even heard the case, that then would have looked as something as being weak, and they don't want to do that right now. They don't want that attention.
Yeah, exercising empathy or reopening a case that has evidence to the contrary of the previous finding. This should not be interpreted as weakness, right? This is
right.
This is exercising logic and judgment, and instead, what they're doing is they're failing to exercise any judgment, even as they are the judiciary.
Yep.
Which is
and
beyond stupid.
It's if we look at Marcellus Williams, he was on death row for 24 years. So, why was it all of a sudden there was a rush right at that moment? Why couldn't they say, hey, we're going to extend this a little while? What other evidence is available that they just ignored? And this is, again, it's a case that's been looked into a whole lot. And I think if there's any question whatsoever, then you gotta slow down the execution. I mean, we know that here in the history of the United States, we have executed innocent people. A great case that illustrates that is the one out of Texas of Johnny Frank Garrett. This was just an individual who was in the wrong place, was in the wrong social class and the wrong intellectual ability class. And boy, the DAs in the Amarillo area just abused this kid and got him convicted. And They ended up executing him. And after the execution, when the mom asked for an apology from the state of Texas, I believe somebody by the name of George Bush said, Texas does not make mistakes. And if you bring this up again, we will sue you. So, yeah.
Texas does not make mistakes is something that Texas has lost the right to say so long ago.
Right. They do a great job when it comes to heating, don't they? In the winter. Yeah.
Yes.
Take our trips to Cancun then.
I was listening to something yesterday. Apparently there's been a lot of deaths in police pursuits there in the last few years since Gregg Abbott opened up this Operation Lone Star, where police are allowed to pursue if they think that somebody is illegally smuggling migrants into the country. And there has been more deaths than there have been chases as a result of these chases. And most of these chases are for traffic violations.
Yeah.
Consider that. So maybe we should like rethink how we do high-speed chases for cops. And maybe most of the time we should let them go, especially if it's for a traffic violation. One thing I'd like to point out, so you said 19 people have been executed so far this year. And this is following a couple of years. Last year in 2023, we had 24 executions across the United States. 2022, only 18 death row inmates were executed. 2021, 11. So the last few years have been like these record lows compared to what we've previously seen. And no deaths would be great in my view, but it is nice to see that we've had this lower trend, but it is picking back up, which is not a good thing.
Right. And, when we go back to the 90s and, as an example of the comparison, when we have 98 executions in a year and 99, that's what we're really comparing that to. So these are lower years compared to what it used to be in the 90s. And I really think that, we're there's a lot of different things that feed into us not executing people, specifically the difficulty with getting the drugs for lethal injection, the expenses that go along with it, and people realizing that when somebody is executed, the victims of the original crime do not come back. So it's not like there's, this thing called closure that everybody talks about doesn't exist. No. As a co-victim, you're still missing that family member. So I think we're starting to realize that. But again, if we look at the reasons why we have an uptick in it, it has a lot to do with the politicians in those states that are pushing the election or pushing these executions.
I forget the name of the book, but closure is. I read a book last year that pointed out closure is a concept invented by media that was really pushed in the 1990s, and the more they pushed it, the more people went like, it gives us closure, and it is just people being brain poisoned by this media invented concept when people don't actually get this closure. Having the murderer of your child killed doesn't actually do anything to make your life better.
Right. So I did interviews with co-victims of murder victims in Texas, where the offender was either on death row or had been executed. And so some of them reported that there was a little bit of a feeling of what would be relief, I guess you would say, not closure. They didn't, they would throw that around, but they didn't. Once he got them talking, it was very clear there wasn't that closure. But they also said, after 3-6 months, maybe a little bit longer, the realization that their family member is still gone weighs so heavily on them. Plus, somebody else's life is gone as well. So, many of them talked about, especially the ones that were much further removed from the execution. So, those that were 8 years, 10 years down the road after the offender was executed, they were very much, there's just more death. There's no such thing as closure. I still miss my daughter, my wife, my child, whatever it might be, my husband. And it's just it's a fun little idea for self-help books, I think. And
I
maybe
agree.
people need closure in relationships, but not when it comes to murder.
It's also a nice idea for pro-death penalty propaganda.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it does advertise some positive effects of the whole thing. When all the research we have, we don't notice any positive effects besides this slight feeling of, I guess it's nice that the murderer's dead, but I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we?
So
move
that's
forward?
the news. Yes,
Yeah,
let's
thanks.
move forward to a happier topic.
We are, yes. This has taken us to a word I learned today, a holler, which is like a valley. Now let's get back to those peaks.
Yes, that's right.
The opposite of a holler.
Yeah, we don't want to be hanging out down in the holler, even though people say go up the holler.
No, these are Louisiana terms, you see. All right. So today we are going to start out talking about a little bit of history around Angola. Now, in 1835, Louisiana establishes its correctional system, and Louisiana inmates are held in a jail in New Orleans. At this time, inmates were leased to private business, and it was estimated that you had about 6 years on your life expectancy if you're an inmate with a longer sentence. So they're working you to death, literally, if you don't die of like disease within the jail system. In 1835 is when Louisiana establishes its correctional system. Inmates of the state are held in a jail in New Orleans. And in 1844, Louisiana signs its first convict lease for the Louisiana State Penitentiary, which was built in Baton Rouge. This is the first Louisiana State Penitentiary, but they called this one the Walls instead of Angola. And with this convict lease, inmates were leased to private businesses, and life expectancy was at about 6 years for inmates with longer sentences. So you die being worked to death, you die of disease in the jail. About 10% of inmates are dying annually in Louisiana from the years 1850 to 1900. And prior to 1850 Civil War era, they had almost no black inmates. Pre-Civil War inmates got to live in the prison buildings, and they had more decent living conditions. Post-Civil War, during the Reconstruction era, the population of the prison became majority black, and they were forced to sleep in camps and tents on the job site. They received brutal treatment. They often slept on these wooden platforms. There was brutal punishments such as whippings, beatings, corporal punishment all around. Now, around this time, there was a man named Samuel James, Major Samuel James, a major in the Confederate Army, and he's in charge of leasing inmates from the Walls. And Samuel James takes his earnings that he makes from the leasing system, and he buys the site that becomes Angola and becomes the new Louisiana State Penitentiary. It had been built up by this man named Isaac Franklin. It was a former slave plantation, and it was named Angola after a region in Africa many slaves had come from. And Isaac Franklin named it Angola because he believed that's where the best slaves came from, which is a disgusting and shocking fact.
Yeah, that's just awful to hear.
And since Major James was leasing inmates to local corporations and the state could make more money by confining people and then making them work, Louisiana draws in more and more inmates than ever after passing these black codes that prohibited minor infractions of the law for black dudes in the 1860s. And through the system, black dudes would be forced into hard labor like road construction, building railroads, building levees. And is it levee or levee?
Levee.
Oh, I'm building levees.
They don't have too many of those in Alaska, huh?
No, I can't think of a single one, actually. So black dudes get the hard labor. White inmates were given work as clerks, and you have to build crafts, the easy stuff. And this leads to some public pushback in the 1880s. People are pushing back for poor working conditions experienced by inmates under this convict leasing system. But Samuel James had the support of the governor, so the practice continues. And in 1894, Major Samuel James dies suddenly on his porch on the Angola property. And a couple of years later, Louisiana kills off the leasing system, and they buy the site of Angola from James's family, and Louisiana State Penitentiary opens on the site of Angola. At the time they bought it, it was about 8,000 acres. And in 1914, Louisiana expands this to 18,000 acres. So now it's bigger than the island of Manhattan. In 1917, we got this inmate guard system. And this lasted from the early 1900s to the 1960s, where inmates are armed. So inmates who had been convicted of murder were trusted, and they got these positions called trustees. And if they were to shoot anybody trying to escape, they got a 6-month reduction in their sentence. And trustees themselves rarely tried to escape because they had such good material living conditions, and they would experience this huge decrease in their status if they did try to escape. Right? Like you're living high on the hog. Why would you shut that down?
Yeah, you got the good life. You got a different cell or cell block, and we're not calling it that at the point at that time, but you live a very different life. You're very powerful. You get better access to food. You get better food. It's just, why try and give that up if you're going to get, you have that long life sentence, or just a long sentence in general. Why not do it? And you're the powerful one. You're the one who controls who eats when and where people are sleeping, all that fun stuff. So it was a good way to control inmates during that time period.
Right. And keep in mind, many of these inmates don't have a lot outside of prison. So when they're getting their 3 hot meals a day and they have some authority over other people, prison may not seem so bad. And my understanding is some of them were allowed out into like the nearby town for like short jaunts. So life is not so bad at that point for inmates, relatively speaking. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's desirable, but if you're coming from the worst of conditions, this can be slightly less bad on your life. Now, it wouldn't be prison breakdown or breakdown prison, I suppose. This episode is if we didn't have an escape in the mix. We love an escape. We love to talk about an escape.
Good escape stories.
So in 1933, we saw a mass escape from Louisiana State Penitentiary. One of the inmates, this notorious inmate named Charlie Frazier, he organized the escape, and it led to the deaths of 2 employees and one of the trustees, one of these convict guards. And as a result, the powers that be, the administration develops this shitty new form of punishment. And now, problematic inmates are kept in a new unit that was called Red Hats. Do you know about Red Hats?
The Red Hat. I have been to the Red Hat unit, to the old Red Hat cell block.
Oh, tell us about Red Hats.
Oh, the Red Hat is it's awful. So it's this old cell block that was just sitting out in the middle of the field. And they would lock people up in these. They look like, when you go to visit them, they look like they're large, like pretty large cells. So compared to what we're used to seeing inmates in now, whether it's a double bunked or a single bunked room, that is something like 6x8 or 7x9, something like that. These are significantly larger. I would say, it's probably a 12x15 foot room, but they would jam 20 to 25 inmates in there. And the stories of these individuals, the interviews that they did with them while that were incarcerated there, they would stick them in there overnight. Well, with all of those bodies, you can't lay down and sleep. So they would sleep standing up, leaning against the wall or leaning against each other. And the biggest complaint that they have is they just get terrorized by the mosquitoes and the other bugs that were around and in the bayou area. It just, just awful conditions, and, saying that they would not feed them well. They wouldn't give them adequate water, of course, fluids. And so it was horrible, horrible situation, that they stopped using pretty recently. When we think historically, it wasn't all that long ago, because we still have people alive that had been held in the Red Hat. I mean, if you would come up and look at it, there's no way that was recent, but Yeah, it's a beat up old cell block that's just all by itself and was used for punishing large groups of people.
That sounds like unbelievably poor treatment. And do you know why it was called Red Hat?
Oh, I can't remember the exact reason.
Let me tell you. So
Teach
the
us.
problematic inmates wore hats that were dipped in red paint to identify them. So it's pretty easy explanation, but it's weird to paint a hat. I don't feel like the paint would stick very well.
No, that doesn't sound good.
The one condition you did a beautiful job illustrating what this looked like. One condition I don't know if you put in there, the toilet was the washing pail. So your washing pail and your toilet are the same thing. That's yuck.
Yeah,
now,
it's nasty.
In 1952, we have a protest. There's 31 inmates protesting the prison conditions who cut their Achilles tendons. And this sucks, but it got so bad, the working conditions, that it's cool that the inmates did something together as an act of solidarity. And they were called the Heel String Gang and brought attention to the facility.
Not that. That's awful. Oh.
Yeah, I'm not saying disfigure yourself. I like the acting in solidarity.
Yeah,
collective
absolutely.
action. And they were calling attention to the lack of quality food, brutality from COs, the poor working conditions, the poor housing conditions, and prison mismanagement. So it sounds like nothing there is good.
Yeah, that sounds about right. That's why we're heading there.
Yes. Moving forward a little bit in time, we start to phase out the system of inmates working as guards. In the early 1970s, we had like 400 employees monitoring over 4,000 inmates, which seems like a bad idea, especially when COs have to be on the clock there. There has to be a CO available to monitor inmates at all times. 400 people to monitor 4,000 inmates simply is not enough. And we're seeing a very violent time here. From 1972 to 75, we have 40 inmate murders, 375 stabbings. Inmates are sleeping with meal trays taped to their stomachs or like under their shirts or like magazines, phone books, just to protect themselves. That's armor.
That the fact that an inmate has to do that to feel like they need to sleep through the night. That's awful. Just awful.
For sure. In the early 1970s, some inmates sued the facility for beatings, for the red hat conditions, for rampant inmate rape and murder, black inmates having to work the fields while white inmates were promoted to these cush positions, arbitrary discipline, and poor medical care. And all of this led to some federally mandated reforms in 1975. And from the reforms, they built more buildings to relieve some overcrowding. They hired some doctors. Inmate dorms were desegregated only in 1975. They hired some black employees, and they cut out all the remaining inmate corrections officer positions. Like, inmates are no longer charged with guarding their own. And with some exceptions, the violence abated following the reforms. There's fewer violent incidents and there's fewer deaths. So there's some good change in the process. Now I want to move on to talk about some of our notable wardens. We got some interesting cats who are hired to run the prison over time. And I'm sure you know about some of them. The first one, Ross Maggio, known as Boss Ross. How cool of a
Boss
nickname
Ross.
is that? I wish my name rhymed with boss.
But there's so many other things your name rhymes with.
Neck, heck, Shrek. I've got 3, and one's not really a word.
Deck.
4. There we go.
Peck. We can go on. We could hit the whole damn alphabet.
I'd rather not. I think this is a waste of our time and our listeners' time. So,
yeah,
Boss Ross Maggio. Do you know anything about Boss Ross?
The one thing I seem to remember about Boss Ross was the one who really started using the space there at Angola to really farm out produce and animals, and so he was the first one to really start to think like a capitalist as a warden, I would say.
Oh, running the prison like a business, one of those.
Yes.
Not great.
Now he didn't perfect it, because that warden has yet to come. But yeah, so starting to think of it as a way to be a capitalist.
Can we perfect the system? I think you're perfecting an imperfect system.
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, again, for the folks down there, if you can turn a profit in a public prison, they see it as being perfect. For a capitalist, not in terms of penology.
Yes, agreed. So he's warden. Boss Ross ends up as warden from 1976 to 1984. He built Camp J, which is their solitary confinement center, which I believe probably took over from the Red Hat. Is that correct?
Yes, you are correct, sir.
So that's their solitary unit that just shut down a few years ago.
And obviously the biggest change from their current solitary confinement unit in Red Hat is that the inmates are truly solitary. It's not 15 or 20 inmates thrown into a bullpen type of area where they get crammed in there and they're standing up to sleep. This is a very typical single cell with a slab and with few privileges.
Yes. He's got more of this get tough orientation with inmates. He's like dedicating all his time to tightening up security, pushing the ideals of hard inmate labor. He does institute some rehabilitation programs. But in 1977, a federal judge ruled that this prison shocks the conscience, were his words, and it breached the Eighth Amendment guarantee to cruel and unusual punishment. So they did have some more reforms taken at that time. And interestingly, Boss Ross, he went to Disney World with his family and he said, I want Angola to look like Disney World. And so he tries to beautify Angola based on these standards. So the front office area looks nicer, which it's the lipstick on a pig idea. Like, why would you try to make it look like Disney World?
Yeah, no. And I think rather than lipstick on a pig, lipstick on a wild boar hog,
Oh, yeah. I bet they have those down there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little bit meaner. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a mean place we're going to. So, yeah, the lipstick doesn't do much for it.
Perhaps the most interesting story about Boss Ross. He and his family at one point are taken hostage by some inmates. And he and his mom are taken hostage and put in his work truck. And as a hostage, he's driving the truck and he crashes it into a gate near the front of the prison. And he gets out, and one of the gate guards has a gun. These are some of the only armed people in the entire prison. He grabs the guard's gun, he shoots and kills one inmate, and he wounds the other and gets away out of this hostage-taking situation.
That's a very dramatic, a very dramatic thing to happen at a prison. That's like, that really is like one of the things you see in one of these Hollywood movies or television shows, a series, and where people are driving trucks through fences and that kind of crap, and people getting shot. Yes, right.
It feels like, honestly, the wardens here would be such a good mini series in their different tenures. The guy after him, Hilton Butler, which I think besides Boss Ross, that's a really good name, Hilton Butler. He picks up the mantle after Boss Ross leaves. He has this short and unremarkable tenure. Hilton Butler was most notable for his firing in 1989 after he ripped out some of those security protocols put into place. And he was found to be operating a cockfighting ring at Angola using inmate labor.
A little sideshow.
Yeah. Something to keep the
a little
inmates
money,
interested.
A little gambling. Yeah.
His time at Angola it's more complicated than just a straightforward firing. So he initially resigned he changed his mind about the resignation. He said, no, I'm coming back. And then they fired him, which I like all of this. I think it's all funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our next successor, John Whitley. He ran Angola from 1990 to 1995. And John Whitley, he started off liberal. He was this hippie type. He started at Angola as a CO in 1970. This guy rose through the ranks during the most violent years at Angola, the years of people taping magazines to themselves when they go to bed so they don't get stabbed. And he claims during his time there, he saw 25 years of seeing the worst in humanity, and he gets away from being this hippie type towards this more conservative, get tough orientation. During his time there, he did establish some incentives for good behavior, like if you're on your best behavior, you get extra visits or educational opportunities, some computer courses, some paralegal courses. And he would even let some inmates leave the prison grounds for extracurriculars, like the athletic teams or the inmate band that plays charity functions, or at churches or nursing homes. And
pretty progressive for that time period.
Agreed. And the one thing he did that, so during his tenure, he tried to have inmates in the metal shop build the bed / gurney, I guess, that would be used for lethal injection. And the inmates were like, hell no, we're not going to build this.
We're not going to assist you in executing us for some strange reason.
Yeah, right. Like we're not going to build a device of our own destruction. And so the inmates refuse. They protest, and our guy John Whitley brings out the armed corrections officers, and he locked up 400 men into cells. Then he actually does something cool, and he backs down, and he says, yo, I made a mistake. I should not have done that. And apparently by doing that, he gained the inmates' trust, because it's so rare that a warden would make a definitive move like this and then say, sorry, I made a mistake.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden he's kind of seen as being fair.
It's seen as being human above all. Like, oh, I'm a person. I'm not infallible. I can make mistakes too. If you remember a few episodes ago when we were talking about, oh, you weren't here. When we were talking about Lucasville, King Arthur, the Arthur Tate, the warden of Lucasville, he like messed up the air conditioning system, but he refused to back down, and it just left the prison super hot all the time. Just when you make a mistake, it's okay to reverse course and say, hey, let's try something different. Yeah, own it.
Own it. Own it. It's okay to say I screwed up.
I completely agree. Now, this guy, and I think it might make you a better manager. It makes you human to the people who work for you.
It makes, I mean, hell, even in relationships, I'm constantly apologizing to my wife for things. I don't even know what the hell I did. I just say, I'm sorry. Sorry, dear. I'm sorry. Gets us through the day.
Well, the apology means less if you don't know what you did.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It still works. I'm sorry, dear.
Your wife's not a listener, is she?
Of course she is.
Oh, okay.
I'll apologize after she listens. I'm sorry, dear.
Shout out to Delana, wife of the pod. Next on our warden tour, we have Burl Cain, the man himself. Not a cool name like Ross Ross, but Burl Cain is a cool name.
That is a good Southern name, Burl. It just sounds. Hey, it's Burl Cain. You just sound Southern when you say Burl.
So he's got a mixed legacy, but it's pretty rough. It leans in the rough direction. Mm-hmm. He's all optics, this guy Burl Cain. I've read a couple books focusing on Burl Cain, some articles recently. The man's all optics. He's this weird Trumpian figure where he toots his own horn a lot, talking about, I implemented this and that rehabilitation program. And his rehabilitation programs are so largely Christian based. And people will ask him, but doesn't that interfere with this separation between church and state? And he says, yeah, but look at the results. We have less violence here and it works. The problem is maybe it doesn't. There are several sources I've looked at that suggest violence was abated at the prison like 10 years before he came there, but he's still the one taking credit for it. Also, prison violence was starting to go down around the country at the same time.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, and I'd say let's give him the credit he deserves. He did increase the opportunities for participation in programs, whether they're inside or going outside the prison, right? He
Yes.
definitely drove those up. However, being included in these programs, whether they were educational, participatory in terms of recreation, going outside and leading the CPR classes that he got going, where the inmates would go to the outside and teach people how to do CPR, all of those things, great. But being able to be included, to be a participant, meant that you were part of his exclusive creation in this branch of Christianity that was out of the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary that he created, and it was his own version of Christianity. And if you didn't follow that, there are plenty of examples coming from inmates and individuals who work there who will tell you that this is the way it was. And if you bought into this and played the role of being a good disciple in this religion, you had a lot more opportunity than if you didn't. And I am certain that it didn't just go to participating in things like education or recreational programs. I'm sure that also played in the parole hearings. And that's when things really, that's when it, is impacting people's lives.
And freedoms. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like inmates, if they maintain their political and religious beliefs, there's several inmates who have stated that they even face time in solitary.
Yep.
That's messed up.
Yeah. Yeah, you think about, I mean, the psychological damage that occurs to individuals while they're locked up in solitary confinement is devastating. And then to know that you were sent there because you won't buy into the warden's brand of Christianity, that's not good.
It's interesting too. He opened it up so much for journalists, for tours, and to a way that the prison never was previously and has not even been since. He's all
Yep.
optics, but it's not.
Yep.
It's optics on his terms.
Yep, exactly. And that's one thing again. Yeah. And again, to give him some credit here, what you just said in terms of the openness of the prison. Now, granted, I never saw the prison prior to Burl Cain. I've only known Burl Cain and since. The tours are different. The visitations are different. Going on to when I brought my first group of students and many of them since then, because I've been going down here for years visiting this prison. I think my first trip was in 2004. That the experience that we had lasted 3.5 hours. We were inside the institution for a very long time. We would go to a cell block, visit with some inmates. We'd go to the programming that was available. We went to death row, talked to some inmates there, went to the death chamber. We had lunch with the inmates. It was a very open experience. Now, as you mentioned, we were probably seeing what Burl wanted us to see and nothing else. But man, we saw a lot. And since then, it's far less open of an environment. You don't go on the cell block. When we met with inmates the last time I was there, we met 2 inmates in the chapel who were, handpicked by the warden. It wasn't just wide open. I mean, the first time I went, we were able to go into that wacky ass radio station that they have. I mean, it's again, I wanted to give him some credit because it was wide open when we were there, and we saw a lot. And it's far more restrictive now. So I'm going to be very interested. The last time I went to a rodeo, he was no longer, it was first rodeo after he was no longer warden. So I'm going to be very interested to see how it's changed in the years since, because it's been a few years now, and see what kind of things are going on there. Now, some might think it's not just the warden, it's post-COVID rodeo, but I'm going to be very interested to see the way it's changed since Burl Cain's left, because it was such a festival or carnival or whatever the hell we want to call it. His big party he would have every year. I'll be very interested to see it in the way it's changed.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear your take when we compare and contrast and debrief after our visit. Cain himself, though, he's gone now. He was there from 1995 to 2016, and he was essentially running a modern day slave plantation. And he like really leaned into this. Inmates are out there picking corn and soybeans. There's corrections officers on horseback with guns. It's something like out of the 1800s. And Burl Cain really leaned into this. They had cars and tractors and like modern machinery that they could use for harvesting and production. And he replaced them with horse and buggy in the plantation areas, just to add authenticity to a shitty situation. Burl Cain also threatened journalists to keep them out of the prison unless they gave him editorial review. He made some unethical business deals. He tried to bring this cannery, not a cannery exactly, but he had this scam he tried to get off the ground at the prison, where in America, we can't sell canned food that has an expiration date that we've already passed by so far. His idea, working with this contractor, was, what if we take canned food that's expired, we take off the labels and we put on our own labels and we ship it off to other countries to sell it there. That sucks.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Bronson says, not me.
Yeah, well, it's again, when we look at, he perfected that capitalism, and when I say perfected, I'm not talking it being legitimate business. He found any way he could to try and make money off of someone, and that he did. And again, if he turned a profit. And that's all the people in the state cared about.
Yeah. Louisiana is a unique monster. Burl Cain's other legacies, he promoted extended stays in solitary for some inmates. And one of his more interesting legacies started in 2012. There were some budget cuts, and Warden Cain had to lay off 105 corrections officers. And there's 42 guard towers in Angola, and he had to close 35 of them. So to make up for the lost bodies, he brought in 80 wolf dog hybrids as his new employees to patrol the fences at night to make sure nobody escaped.
Vicious. That's awful.
Yeah, it's really bad. And by the time he resigns in 2016, Burl Cain is facing allegations of using inmate workers to facilitate home repairs. He maintains that he did nothing wrong, but he resigns. And of course, who swoops in but Mississippi? Hey, Burl Cain, we would like to have you as our new commissioner. Of course, he accepts.
Yep. Yeah.
And so he's off to greener pastures, as in even he's failing upwards as an administrator for Mississippi prisons.
Yes. And the other fun thing is that, something from his personal life, just to go along with this, his own brand and version of Christianity, is according to court records, he has to pay some of his Louisiana state retirement money to his 2 ex-wives. So I guess staying married and not getting divorced in his version of Christianity is okay.
Yes. Thank you. I think getting divorced should be encouraged for people who are unhappy in their marriage.
Yes.
So after Cain, we get this guy, Daryl Vanoy. He took over from 2016 to 2021. There's not a lot of information about him online. He had previously worked as deputy warden under Cain. On his watch, there was some incident regarding payroll administration that went wrong. He's caught up, but and they they open an investigation, but he's cleared of any wrongdoing. There's actually no information online at all about what happened with this incident, but that's really the only information I could find on him. And since 2021, Angola has been under the leadership of Tim Hooper as the warden. He was the former warden at Elaine Hunt Correctional Center. It's the second largest prison in Louisiana. And there's really not much on him other than Warden Hooper being a man who rose through the ranks before becoming warden. And so he's promoted from his way up.
I think really what both these two wardens have dealt with since Cain's left is this. Cain was just such a large figure in terms of being, kind of like coming in and, always being in the media, while he was controlling it, and being in the spotlight and kind of taking over rooms when he would come in, that sort of thing, to I think what we'd expect from a normal warden at institutions where they're, wardens like to work behind the scenes. They don't want to be in the spotlight because if a warden's in the spotlight, that means typically something bad is occurring. That's when we hear about wardens at other institutions. And I think these individuals have come in because of their backgrounds and said, you know what, I don't want to be like this. I don't want to be in documentaries. I don't want to be on the news every week. These inmates don't have to learn my religion. Even though the Cain religion workbooks are still floating around the prison.
Oh, I'd like to see some of these. Let's see if I can get one of those. We're selling it at a crafts fair near us.
Right.
So we talked about some of the wardens. I think it's important to talk about some of the inmates too. And the Angola 3 are some of the most notable inmates there. Now, I'm going to talk about these three gentlemen. Producer Britt, I want you to see if you can tell what the three have in common. Our nearly silent co-host for this episode.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
I want you to pitch in. We start with Herman Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Wallace is convicted of a bank robbery. While he's incarcerated, he becomes a member of the Black Panther Party, and he's focused on reforming shitty prison conditions. He's helping to organize education for inmates. He's involved in organizing hunger strikes to protest racial segregation in the prison and to end rampant rape and violence in the facility. During his time there, he was also indicted and convicted on a murder of a 23-year-old prison guard, Brent Miller, who was found dead with multiple stab wounds. He served 42 years in solitary confinement. He was released in 2013 and died of liver cancer shortly thereafter. So that's Herman Wallace. Albert Woodfox is our next gentleman. Initially sentenced to 50 years in prison for armed robbery. He had escaped from the Orleans Parish Courthouse during his sentencing hearing in 1971. He booked it over to New York City. The authorities catch up with him. Then they extradite him back to Louisiana, and they lock him up in Angola. In prison, he joins the Black Panther Party, teaches other inmates to read, leads some political discussions, and he, along with Herman Wallace, he's also indicted and convicted for the murder of this corrections officer. And he served 43 years in solitary for this. And he maintained his innocence the whole time as well. At one point, his conviction went up for... He appealed his conviction, and instead of going to retrial for burglary and manslaughter, he took a plea deal for time served. He said, I'm too old for this. Like, I would have liked to have proved my innocence. But like with his advanced age and health issues, he's like, let's just get it over with. I already did the time. Let's get me out of this. So he served 43 years in solitary. And he was released in 2016, but he died from COVID in 2022 at age 75. 43 years in solitary. Our last gentleman is Robert Hillary King. At age 18, he's sentenced to 35 years in Angola. He was alleged to have murdered a CO and an inmate during his time at Angola. He's acquitted on the murder of the CO and maintained innocence on the second of murdering an inmate, though he took a plea deal to get himself out with time served. He is one of the originators of the Black Panther chapter at Angola and served 29 years in solitary. He's now out. He's a prison reform advocate. He makes TV appearances. He wrote a book that was published in 2008, Bottom of the Heap, Autobiography of a Black Panther. And he's also very notable for an NPR story done about him. he would make pralines while he was in solitary confinement using ingredients he would cobble together from corrections officers and other inmates. So with these three gentlemen, what's the commonalities we're seeing?
Black Panther Party, obviously. We have also they are accused of murdering a CO, all of them, yeah. And they all spent maybe record times in solitary confinement.
That is indeed. These are record times in solitary confinement. That, can you imagine? Like, neither of us are even 40 years old. Like to spend 42 years in solitary confinement, this is the majority of their lives.
Mm-hmm. That's a tragedy. That is no way to let a human live. Like, I would frankly rather get the death penalty than spend 40 years in solitary confinement.
Yeah. At what point, like 10 years solitary confinement would be like, would I rather die?
I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, think about what, and this is something I often ask the students to think about. Think about when we did our little shutdown with COVID, and everybody stayed at home for a couple months, right?
Yeah.
Right at the beginning there in March and in April in 2020, and look at the impact that had on mental health. And for some people, it was long term. Individuals that stayed home for 6 months and longer, there was a dramatic impact. And imagine if this was involuntary isolation. If you didn't have control over yourself and you were forced into solitary confinement, the damage is something that I don't think society cares to know about. So
I agree. And I but at least during COVID, we had human contact, like with a few other people, and we had stuff to do. I was never bored during COVID. In a cell by yourself with maybe a book or two, like very few amenities. This is worse. This is like one of the worst forms of torture. You think about how it would reshape your brain just from being in solitary for a year, for 6 months, and times that by 42.
Yeah,
your brain is applesauce by the end of that to some degree. Like you're not thinking the same. I can't imagine going back to the outside world after that. How unprepared you would be.
Yeah, it's, and again, Wallace was there for 41 years, right? And that,
yes,
and
Woodfox there for 42 or 43.
That's just awful. I mean, you just figure the people who did that. If we look at solitary confinement in other places, the United Nations suggests that solitary confinement needs to be limited to 15 days, and then there's a reintroduction to general population. And the United States, we think that we are some kind of human rights, the bastion of human rights in the world, and we clearly just don't. When it comes down to it, we do not care about human rights. That the fact that these kind of things go on. We like to point our finger at places like China and North Korea, but and we have our own very serious violations here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we we like to look the other direction too often because they're unpleasant, or not think about the human impact of it, or force the discussion to focus on something like, yeah, well, this guy's dangerous. Even as this guy is alleging his innocence, how strong is the evidence? I have no idea how strong the evidence is, but after 40 years, is this 70-year-old man that likely to murder someone? Probably not, but you are making him likely more bitter by keeping him in solitary.
Well, and think about how do you reintroduce someone like that in the society? I mean, do we just push them out the door and say, hey, good luck? How are they going to be able to interact with others? Right.
Yeah, it's such a shame. And especially like how these guys finally get released, and there's no even semi-happy ending for them because they get a couple years out at most, and then they both died. The one guy, the one, which gentleman was it? The last gentleman I was talking about, who was making pralines in prison, who goes on speaking tours, Robert Hillary King. He's the only one who has any kind of happiness at all to speak of for the end. It's a tragedy, man. Do better by people.
Right.
And like put I don't know. I think for corrections officers, maybe we also emphasize empathy in training too. They don't have to be overly empathetic. They don't have to overly identify with people in their care, but teach them to understand that these are humans that we're dealing with. These are people who feel things too. A lot of them came from broken homes, bad places, that they didn't learn to be socialized like the rest of us, but oppressing them doesn't make them better.
Right. No, not at all. I mean,
all right, I'm off my soapbox.
Okay.
That is the end of this section. We're done talking about Angola for now. Producer Britt, what's up next?
I think it's time for a little library lockdown.
Library lockdown. Library lockdown. Come on in and take a look, 'cause it's time to review a book. Said library lockdown. Library lockdown. Library lockdown. Library lockdown.
Alrighty. So for library lockdown this week, I'm going to be talking about a book I just finished up. 2022's Homelessness is a Housing Problem. So Homelessness is a Housing Problem by Clayton Page Aldern and Gregg Colburn, respectively a data scientist and a professor of real estate at the University of Washington, was a really great read. The book spends all of its time reinforcing its title, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, which I thought was pretty brilliant. There's no anecdotes, no real human element, just statistical analysis with lots of graphs and figures showing that the reasons for homelessness aren't the so-called conventional wisdom reasons such as drugs, mental illness, poverty rates, more favorable climates, and public assistance. Instead, with all other factors taken into account, the authors argue that high costs and low availability of rental housing are the primary statistical indicators of homelessness on a city, county, and statewide level in the United States. Overall, the book was a quick read with lots of great visual tools to guide you through the author's reasoning. It's a fantastic little resource to rebuke basically every single NIMBY argument out there. No criticisms, highly recommended, 4 out of 5 soups.
Wow. That's a pretty high rating for you.
It was a good book. I enjoyed it.
Right.
It was just the type of nonfiction book that I like. Like, it wasn't, I don't know. I like nonfiction that's actually like really dry, very academic, but also written in like an accessible, not too statistical way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Hang on just a second, guys. I'm getting a call, and I think it has to do with the flooring guys here. I'm sorry.
All right, no worries.
It's gonna fuck it all up.
It's all good. This is why I have the editing software.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a two-man cell block. Two-man cell block. You have a cellmate, you have to work 4 hours, sleep in the cell at night, preparation on the weekend.
2, 3, break!
So I have a library lockdown to add as well.
Oh, no, we finished. You're gonna have to save it.
Yeah, we're all done.
Oh, did you do the movie minute?
Yeah, we did. We did the movie minute. We did the wrap up. I just impersonated you.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I was like, I'm Professor Beck.
What did you think of movie? What did you think of The Farm?
I'm kidding. We didn't actually do any of that.
You son of bitches.
It was like 14. All right, let's dive back in. So yeah, that was my review. Y'all want to comment on the review, and I'll field any questions.
So what's the solution for homelessness?
More affordable housing. That's it. More rental housing in general, not just affordable.
And I think,
but all rental housing.
And I think that regulation for, in towns and cities for first-time home buyers type of thing, that low-cost housing, there's got to be regulations to keep that under control so that, these folks that are buying 2, 3, 4 houses and only living in one of them, and renting it out and driving that price through the roof. There's got to be regulations for that.
Oh yeah, housing market conditions is another big indicator for homelessness in any given area. Yeah, it comes down to the real estate market is the primary driver for homelessness, and which tells me that maybe we should just get rid of the whole market system when it comes to real estate. But that's a little bit of a communist idea.
It's so supply and demand based too, right? Like with more supply, housing gets cheaper, and that effect would get diffused, I assume.
Yeah, exactly, and that's a reason why a whole lot of NIMBYs are very against, and real estate developers are against public housing, is because public housing in any given area, if you give away housing for free or an incredibly reduced rate, suddenly the rates of housing around that area start to fall as well. And so real estate developers aren't making as much money, which, oh no, so yeah, it's just, we've got a system we've built up that is the worst possible system we could have thought of, but it's so entrenched and we have so many people making very good livings off of it that, they just campaign and lobby in order to keep the system exactly as it is.
Oh yeah, my favorite is my beloved city of Providence. Mayor Brett Smiley has never met a real estate developer he doesn't love, and he's like, we have a housing crisis in Rhode Island, but the new construction is luxury condos. That doesn't necessarily help us build our way out of the problem.
Right.
It makes it less affordable unless we're trying to attract, I don't know, new out-of-state people to come in. Let's look into housing for people who already live here who need affordable housing. It's gross. He reminds me of, if anyone's seen Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo, the politician working with a real estate developer who is ready to knock down the community center and build a mall. Yeah, that guy.
But it just goes to show you how old that is, not just because it's breaking, but also building a mall. Who the hell builds a mall?
Yeah, exactly. Who builds new malls? Do we have new malls?
They're all being shut down.
I would love to hear about a new mall. That's an encouraging piece of news right there. Let's become a mall podcast.
Yep.
We'll just review different malls. Oh, I actually love this idea. Mall breakdown.
It's a mall minute. Yeah.
Eric, you got any questions? Any other questions for the producer?
No, sir.
I would like to offer a short and sweet review for a book I recently read, 2005's Cain's Redemption by Dennis Shere. It is about Louisiana State Penitentiary. I got some of my information from there. It is a pretty good source of information historically and somewhat factually. But at some points, Dennis Shere makes this mistake of going into speculative territory where he talks about some of the inmates who are making crafts or participating in the rodeo and speculating, oh, maybe this is like their destiny. Maybe this is like the best thing for them. And I don't think that in all the possibilities that somebody could have, being in prison is the best. It paints him as either like naive or stupid or just a propagandist for Burl Cain, who is the main subject of the book. I give it, I don't know, 2.5 soups. Just I appreciate the factual information provided in there. Too much speculation and too much ass kissing of Burl Cain makes the book. Give it a miss.
Yeah, it's not a great book, but I seem to remember, because it's been a while since I've read that. But when they're talking about, there was a service on Easter Sunday with all these stars coming in to perform at the service. And it just seemed like, when you have Charlie Daniels and Aaron Neville singing at the service with 2,000 inmates, that they're all performing for Burl Cain. And, when you have Barbara Walters talking about, what was going on at the rodeo and the craft show, and, they're, this is a tension-free prison or something along those lines. It just, wow. I think he was pulling the wool over people's eyes in a big way.
Yeah, I think the wool was also pulled over his eyes to some degree as well, because he's writing like he really believes this stuff, and he really believes that Cain is doing the best thing for these inmates. And I don't know, the whole thing felt very almost like this silly paternalism. Cain had this weird paternal streak where he would tell the inmates, "I am your daddy. I am your mommy and your daddy, and you will do as I say." Like that kind of stuff. I don't know. It just helps to perpetuate the legend of Burl Cain, and I don't think we need much more of that.
Right? No, we don't.
Hey, one of my favorite stories in the book. There's an inmate escaping, and he gets on the loudspeaker, the PA system on his Suburban, and he goes, "Ooh," and he pretends he's like a ghost in the woods, and the inmate goes, "Help! There's ghosts in these woods." And he comes running back to the prison. Or another time, there's an inmate who escapes, and he pretends there's a fire in an apartment building, and the apartment building has to be evacuated. And it was the apartment building where they knew the inmate was, and this affects other people in the apartments too,
Right.
He just loves to build a legend of Burl Cain.
Yep.
Shall we move on to our favorite segment?
It's a time for a movie minute.
It's time for a movie minute.
Movie minute.
Movie minute.
Movie minute. 60 seconds with producer Britt to talk
I think it's movie minute.
movies.
Hey, let's put 60 seconds on the clock. So,
TikTok.
last week, I believe it was Judge Strah here who sentenced me.
Bronson.
Oh, Bronson. Sentenced me to watch 1998's The Farm, Angola, USA. So, The Farm, Angola, USA from 1998 is a documentary co-directed by Wilbur Rideau, an inmate in the prison at the time. The documentary follows 7 men, including himself, as they go through the daily life and once-in-a-lifetime opportunities of being in prison. I learned some interesting stuff watching this film. At the time it was shot, Angola employed 1,800 workers, with 200 employees living in an on-site town built specifically to serve the prison. The prison regularly holds over 5,000 inmates, and 85% of those men who enter die there. The documentary also explores some of the social programs introduced into the prison, many implemented by our favorite warden, Burl Cain, who had just taken over a couple years earlier when this film was shot. We visit the prison radio station and the prison chapel, complete with music and rotating sermons given by prisoners. We also visit some other areas, such as a parole hearing that goes very poorly, a man dying in the prison infirmary, a staged execution, a prisoner's final meal before he is executed, and finally, a visit with the warden, Cain himself. Overall, it was a really good documentary that showed life in prison in a really interesting and unique way. I do now wonder, though, some of the information and favorable light they gave to Cain, though, given all the information you gave me. So I'm going to amend my score because of that. I had originally given it 4 out of 5 soups. I'm going to give it 3 out of 5 soups because it is definitely a little bit propaganda for Cain.
Yeah, his legacy is interesting in that he painted himself as this progressive guy who was like a champion of inmates. He did advocate for some things like geriatric inmates shouldn't be here. They're not the ones committing crimes. They should be getting out. But that also helps him, and it helps his prison budget is a big piece of this. When these guys get out of prison, their care is not paid for. They are just going to be wards of the state on the outside, not affecting his budget. So I don't know. Everything here is just problematic. Everything. He was so good at spin and making things that were self-serving seem not self-serving. Seem like in the public's interest. The more I learn about this guy, the more infuriated I get.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. He's something else.
And Britt, what did you think about Cain based on his presentation in the film?
I mean, he seemed like a pretty reasonable guy. Like, he seemed very focused on, like, as we kind of talked about, like the social programs, but a lot of them were steeped directly in religion, especially obviously the whole church thing that they spent quite a long time on. I mean, it seemed pretty cool and like a good thing for the inmates, definitely. At the same time, I do have to wonder, like, what other social programs suffered in lieu of the church. What could have they have been doing besides church that would have helped the inmates?
Eric and I watched a video with our class yesterday discussing the rodeo, and in it they interviewed Cain and an inmate. And with the inmate, they said, "Aren't you worried about none of the inmates being trained to do this?" And he's like, "Hey, listen, I'm here for the rest of my life. I might as well. What do I have to lose?" He makes 2 cents an hour, and you can win like up to $500 in the rodeo.
Yeah. So I think the thing that really jumps out at that part of it, and that's why I show it, pick that, because they said, well, they asked Cain, well, why do the inmates do it? And he goes, hey, everybody's a volunteer. They all volunteer for this. Nobody would do it if nobody's forced.
It's good.
And then they
fun.
go to the, yeah. And then they go to the inmate and they said, well, why are you doing it? And he goes, for the money, the money. He goes, I'm trying to hire a private investigator to help me with my case. And again, if he makes 2 cents an hour, he can win. If there's 2 ways to win money. There's one event at the very end where you're supposed to pull a poker chip off the forehead of a bull. You can win $500 for that. Or if you're a top cowboy, you can win $500. So there's $1,000 up for grabs. That's driving 70 inmates to participate in things that they have no background in, no practice, leading up to it. It just screams exploitation. And, the Romans at the Colosseum with the Christians in alliance.
Yeah. And when asked about it, he says, it's just good, clean fun. And
yeah,
he's discounting the whole parts where inmates have been paralyzed, inmates have been killed. Let's consider that. And yes, maybe it seems like they don't have much to lose because they're locked up here for the rest of their lives. And it's infuriating, especially when you consider the number of hours that you would have to work at 2 cents an hour to gain $500.
So let's do the math real quick on that. So at 2 cents an hour, to earn $500 would take you 25,000 hours, which is the equivalent to 12 and a half years working a full-time job.
So tell me, Britt, is there is it good, clean fun, or is there coercion?
Right.
I believe there is a coercive element to it.
I think so too. It's exploitation. There is the argument that the rodeo raises, I think it's like $4 million a year that goes into an inmate fund that allows for inmate programs, and it pays for services like if an inmate dies, their burial and building the coffin. It pays for inmates getting to go outside of the prison occasionally for funerals. If a close family member dies, they're escorted by corrections officers. It pays for that kind of stuff. It's just, Louisiana is one of those states that's so hell-bent on we don't want to tax people that they don't, and then we have to make up for it with stuff like rodeo funds.
Right.
Yeah. You gotta find a way to pay the bill, no matter where you're at. How you pay the bill is obviously up in the air, but you gotta pay these types of bills, and especially it is the most punitive state in the country. They incarcerate at a higher rate for longer periods of time than any other state, and if you're not going to tax folks, you got to find another way to do it. And so this is one of the very creative ways they do it.
This violent public spectacle is something that is a draw. I see why it's a draw. I'm sure it's entertaining.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's my movie minute.
Judge Bronson,
All right.
Do you have any recommendations for next week?
No sentence for next week. I sure don't.
Oh,
mainly because we're going to be at the prison next week, in New Orleans next week.
I know.
So
that. For the next session, for our next record.
Oh, we should have something awful like maybe like Steven Seagal on Cops in New Orleans, because didn't he work for like a sheriff's department in one of the parishes? That is just awful stuff.
He did, but I think we can do better than that, because that's not a movie. That's a television show. This is not a television show minute.
Yeah.
Well, no, let's punish him for several series.
It's movie minute, not TV time.
So I've had some ideas for TV time. We'll integrate eventually.
Yeah.
But for next week, for our next record, thank you, Bronson. Our sentence to producer Britt is 1984's Condemned to Hell.
Okay.
Condemned to hell. What kind of mess is this?
Sylvia is incarcerated in a corrupt women's prison and forced to participate in drug distribution. When she refuses, she is punished and her sister murdered. She will try to get free and get her revenge.
Okay. Sounds on topic.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Wait, it's been a while since we had a women in prison film, and I think it's that time again.
This sounds awful.
I better get some shower scenes.
Well, we wish you the best on those shower scenes, producer Britt.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
With that, let's wrap up the pod. Thanks once again to our beloved sponsor, Roger Williams School of Justice Studies. And thank you, listener, for listening and making it this far with the three of us fools. If you liked listening, please please rate, please subscribe, and we'll see you back next time on this here podcast. And you want to do the honors, Bronson?
Lights out?
It is lights out.
Lights out.
Lights
Rack up.
Lights out. Lights out.